A long unresolved dispute that has been averted for decades has come back to haunt the Nile basin countries. Can there be a fair distribution of the Nile waters, with Egypt claiming historical rights, while others downstream say they were not consulted? Could water disputes over the Nile spark a water war? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the programme. I'm Sahil Rahman. Former Egyptian President Anwar Sadat once said, "The only matter that could take Egypt to war again is water," and that was 30 years ago. But even today, water is a crucial issue in Egypt. Along with Sudan, it refuses to sign an agreement on the division of water from the Nile. The river is at the heart of the controversy involving the 10 countries it flows through: Egypt, Sudan, Eritrea, Ethiopia, Uganda, the Democratic Republic of Congo, Rwanda, Kenya, Tanzania and Burundi. They're also known as the Nile basin countries. Now it stretches 6,741 kilometres. 160 million people live along that stretch, and in total it's estimated around 300 million people rely directly and indirectly on its waters. Well, last week the basin countries were in Egypt discussing a new water sharing deal called the Cooperative Framework Agreement. They want what they call an equitable water sharing agreement. Egypt and Sudan believe they are entitled to a substantial percent of the Nile based on old agreements and have refused to sign the new protocol. Well, Egypt's Minister of Water Resources and Irrigation, Mohammed Alam, said Egypt reserves the right to take whatever course it sees suitable to safeguard its share. Egypt's share of the Nile's water is a historic right that Egypt has defended throughout its history. Well, but the other countries say they're going ahead with the agreement without Egypt and Sudan. Well, joining me today to talk about this more, from Nairobi, we have John Nauru, the Director of Water Resources in Kenya. In Cairo, Dia El-Din El-Quosy, water expert and former Deputy Chairman of the National Water Research Centre in Egypt. And in Amman, we're joined by Dourid Manhasne, a water expert and consultant on water issues. Gentlemen, thanks for joining us on this edition of Inside Story. Mr. Nauru in Nairobi, can I come to you first? Based on what happened in Sharm el-Sheikh last week, is the 1999 Nile Basin Initiative all but in the recycling waste paper bin?
No, I do not think what happened in Somerset last week will actually disbandle or throw in array the 1999 Nile Basin Initiative. What is in place today, as you know, we started negotiating about 10 years ago in 1997. We were negotiating to come up with an acceptable Nile Basin Cooperative Framework that is negotiated by all independent and the sovereign states of the Nile River Basin. As all the countries believe that any existing arrangement today or existing agreements are not acceptable to all, and they do not actually provide equitable and reasonable utilizations of the Nile Basin water resources. Well, this is one of the basic reasons why we agree.
You do agree, indeed. I'm going to come to the history as well in a moment, but I just want to get just a general feel for what positions you're all coming from. Mr. El-Quosy, can I ask you, sir, what your opinion is of the Egyptian position and the lack of agreement in Sharm el-Sheikh? The Egyptians very angry.
Well, they are actually, because there is no agreement after all these years of cooperation with the Nile Basin countries. The cooperation with Nile Basin countries did not start in Sharm el-Sheikh. It started in the year 1967 with the Hydromet program, followed by the Colonial, and after the Colonial we have good 10 years with the Nile Basin Initiative now. And I believe that nobody in the world would throw all this effort and all this accumulation of cooperation just behind our backs and forget about it and say, no, we did not agree. I believe that everybody sooner or later will agree on a concept which would be acceptable to everybody.
Well, we shall see what does happen. Mr. Mahasne in Amman, just a brief idea of from where you're sitting and from your expertise in these sorts of water issues, viewing from afar, what do you make of events that happened in Sharm el-Sheikh?
I think we are witnessing some maneuvers pre or through negotiations. And definitely this is normal, though probably not healthy. I do agree with both gentlemen that all parties have to sit down and agree on this. And if they don't agree on this all among themselves, then probably they would go to a next stage of having somebody to work as an arbitrator among them and start to do something. Now, the issue here is definitely linked to overpopulation, poverty, need for more water, and definitely climate change is also increasing the dilemma. But I see no way out except they all agree among themselves. Now, whether any agreement that parties would approve or say sign, with the exception of one party, two parties, or more than that, would not be valid and would not be practical. We would go to point zero back again. So the stress again, or the point to go back to, is negotiations and nothing else.
Well, let's put this all into context for our viewers and give them a little bit of history of what's been going on. Well, the origins of the current situation go back, as some of our guests have already mentioned, to the beginning of the 20th century. In 1929, there was a treaty between Egypt and Britain acting on behalf of its African colonies along the river. Now, that treaty gave Egypt the lion's share of Nile water, along with a veto power over upstream projects which could threaten the flow of the river. Well, 3 decades later, in 1959, Egypt signed an agreement with Sudan, giving Egypt 55.5 billion cubic metres of water annually, while giving Sudan 18.5 billion cubic metres. So in 1999, the Council of Ministers of Water Affairs for the 10 Nile Basin states we've just mentioned developed the Nile Basin Initiative as a way to share information and search for a new legal framework for managing the Nile in a cooperative manner. Well, but after last week's conference, as we've seen, discussing that opinion on the future of the Nile is very split. So that's the background for our viewers. Dr. Mahasne, very quickly, can I come to you first, in that the nations that were willing to sign, obviously, do have a point, do they not, in saying that when Egypt and Sudan signed the paperwork years ago, we were all under colonial rule. We didn't have a democratic voice. We should now be able to voice what is right for us now that our institutions and our governments and our democratic choice is in place. And why should we be bullied by larger states like Egypt and Sudan?
It's not really bullying. It's a matter of fact, Egypt got used to it. I mean, they have been practicing this for years and years, and now this is a different era. This is a different time. These countries are now independent. They have the right to claim what they think is their right. But again, Egypt, as well as the rest of the countries, have to accommodate each other towards a win-win case. And that could be done. There are methods now that one can do more agriculture in others' land with proper systems of irrigation. We take control of the waste. We do investment, shared or joint investments. That's why the NBI was created, actually, to reach such scientific goals. And let's move ahead on that.
Mr. Nauru, if bullying is too strong a word that I've used, I'd like you to come in and describe what this relationship is between a country like Kenya, ruled for some time by the British under colonial rule, and the stance that Egypt has. How do you equate that where you are?
Yes, if you look at, actually, you have rightly put it, the 1929 agreement, if you look at it under Article 14D, gave Egypt exclusive rights and a veto over the waters of the Nile River Basin. In that, any states which were under the British rule, upstream of Sudan, and wanted to utilize the water, must consult Egypt, and Egypt must accept. That is a veto power. If you look at Lanok's case, there is no state which can have a veto power over development of water to another. Again, if you come to 1959 agreement. This is a case where two countries come to themselves, Egypt and Sudan, and come with an agreement for exclusive use of the waters of the Nile, with regardless of the existing of other riparian states. How does it work? These states, even that time, they did not even consult the British, which we were under its rule. But also, if you look at 1978, the Vienna Convention on a clean slate, a newborn state like Kenya, which got independence in 1963, even Tanzania, you look at the Nyerere Doctrine, in that a newborn states cannot automatically accept any colonial agreement if it does not want to do so. But Kenya, when we attained independence, we went very clearly, our late Mr. Jomo Kenyatta gave a notice to all the riparian states, including Sudan and Egypt, through the UN, that we do not want to be a party to this agreement. So any country who feels that Kenya should be a party to them should come and renegotiate.
Well, if that's the case,
in 1965, we gave an
I appreciate what you're saying
extension
date history-wise, and I want to try and bring this into more of a debate and conversation between the three of you gentlemen. Mr. El-Quosy in Cairo, if that's the case, if countries that gain their independence, as we've seen in the 60s and 70s, do not want to and don't have to agree to those colonial agreements, why does Egypt cling on then to those colonial agreements when, even under the years of Nasser, it continued to extol its virtues of independence and standing on its own 2 feet, yet when it's in trouble, it goes back to colonial agreements?
Well, I'm actually not a very good legal expert. However, I learned from international law people that these agreements, which were signed during the era of occupation, especially the water agreements, are sort of treated like boundaries agreements, and they cannot be changed with the change of the regime. This is the point the international law experts say. However, I do not actually agree with you when you said that Egypt is getting the lion's share of the water. The precipitation over the Nile basin is almost 1,600 billion cubic meters per year. What reaches Aswan and divided between Egypt and Sudan is only 84 billion. So you have only 5% going to the tail end of the system, and 95% is used upstream by the others, by the 8 countries actually, and including Sudan as well, to make it 9 countries. All this water is used for rain-fed agriculture. Now Egypt has no other source but the River Nile. The River Nile provides Egypt with 95% of its water.
And that's where the debate is, isn't it? That's where the debate is, though, isn't it, sir? Exactly how much of the water or not Egypt gets, and that's where this sit-down chat between 10 countries is supposed to try and resolve this. Mr. Mahasni, can I bring you in here in Iman? If we move this now onwards from how much water each of these countries gets, let's talk about strategy and what Egypt now has to do, because Egypt has had a very influential role in North Africa and, of course, in influencing its neighbours. Has that strategy changed over the last 20 years because of the geopolitics of the area? And how does that impact exactly on what's going on right now in terms of a share of water?
Actually, politically, we are witnessing the weakening role of Egypt within Africa and the Arab world, and that's the result of it. Such a thing wouldn't have happened, say, 25, 30 years ago. Now it's happening. This is one thing. The second thing is countries like Ethiopia gaining more power within its territories is leading the rest of the group in claiming what they think is right. And if we talk about what is right, this is the issue of the problem, the rightful share of water of each country. Now, that could be calculated. That's not a miracle to calculate, and that could be calculated whether based on my Egyptian colleague assumptions or my Kenyan colleague pretext. It is definitely a scientific thing, and it could be collected. if these countries muscle each other on who is stronger and who's more influential, because we see other involvements in the arena, whether within the neighborhood of each country, Ethiopia and Somalia, Egypt and Sudan, Sudan within. I don't think it's scientifically it shouldn't be a problem.
But isn't there a problem? Isn't there a problem? Isn't there a problem, sir, with veto rights, though?
Of course, everybody claims that it is his right. Mind you, this is the third world, and things are not defined properly well. And worse, the colonial era made it even impossible to solve in future. That's the case everywhere where we had colonies and colonial rule in the rest of the world, and specifically in the Middle East and Africa.
Sure.
But if these people would tend to take issues scientifically and legally and not do their interpretation of international law, and take examples like the Danube River within Europe, it runs through half of Europe, and yet we don't have a single problem. And I could name so many other issues, whether in other estuaries or rivers in South America or within America itself. But the bottom line, this issue could be solved scientifically and according to international law.
Well, let me bring in Mr. Nauru. Let me just, sorry, Mr. Hassan, let me bring Mr. Nauru in. Can, Mr. Nauru, this be solved through scientific analysis and through international law? Because if Egypt and Sudan disagree with you continually, will you have to go to the International World Court?
I think now we do not need to go to any arbitration. What is before us, the draft cooperative agreement that has been negotiated for over 10 years, has been negotiated by all countries, including Egypt. There were originally 39 articles which we have negotiated. All of them were agreed by consensus, except Article 14B, that was to replace the existing agreement, where Egypt and Sudan has come up with what they call their water security. And in blank, they are saying their water security is what they gave themselves in 1959 agreement, where Egypt gave itself 55.5 cubic meters, and Sudan took 18.5. That gives you a total of 75 billion cubic meters out of 90, between 84 to 90 billion.
But you're saying,
cubic
basically
meters.
what you're saying is that you can sort this out. Basically, sir, what you're saying is you can sort this out amongst the group of 10. Is that what you're basically saying?
Yes, but I'm even, you see what we are saying, the agreement is ready, it has been put, the states can go and sign.
Okay.
And I won't be surprised if Egypt is not the first state which will go ahead and sign this agreement, because I don't see any basic reason. If you are talking about the water security, Article 4 and 5 of the draft cooperative framework has given them the required water security that they are talking about, and will give them their equitable allocation as provided under the international law. So through that analysis, to now I think we still have to, we shall be going to Addis Ababa in the next NileCom and the technical advisors and the legal advisors, and we think we might even be able to resolve. What actually culminated in Somerset was not a very good cheering, sorry to say, because states were not given an opportunity to explore further opportunity even to reach consensus. We believe when we shall have maybe 2 or 3 sessions, we shall be able to reach some conclusion and some consensus.
Indeed. I just want to bring in, of course,
yes.
Dr. El-Quosy, on based on what you've just said, that no consensus obviously was agreed in Sharm el-Sheikh. There is an important date coming up in May in Uganda where the agreement will be signed, most probably by those countries downstream, and Egypt and Sudan saying they won't sign. What would it take for Egypt to sign the paperwork in Uganda on May the 14th, or will Egypt dig its heels in and be very difficult on this issue, if that's the case?
Well, I believe what we read in the newspapers is that the 3 conditions that the Egyptians and Sudanese put on the table are actually according to the international law. I doubt if any of these, when I say that whenever any country in the upstream would ask for, or would require actually to construct a dam, for instance, in any location in the basin, he has to come to the other riparian countries and take their agreement.
What would
I
happen, though,
believe that
Dr.
this
Cozy,
is-
what would happen if the agreement is signed by the upstream countries and then one of them builds a dam? What will Egypt do? Go to war? Send in military jets? Go to the international court?
No. There will be no war, no fight, nothing at all, and the agreement will reach a consensus one day. I'm sure that this round of negotiations would be followed by other rounds, and this date of the 14th of May would be changed. We heard the news that the level of negotiations has been now raised from the minister's level to the president's level, and I'm sure with the president's involvement, there will be an agreement, and people will come back to the negotiation table.
Well, you will certainly hope that the Nile that we can see behind you, Dr. El-Quosy, doesn't fall in level. Dr. Mahasne in Amman,
Yes.
if there is a signing of a document, potentially in May, by the upstream nations, bypassing Egypt and Sudan, what sort of tension? I'm not talking about war, we're not trying to hype this up in any way, but what sort of tension does that raise? And how can the international community, such as maybe Russia, the EU, China, the United States, help in trying to solve this problem for those African countries in the region?
Honestly, I would wish we don't have any exterior powers or external powers involved in this issue, because then the whole subject would be complicated. But if the 8 nations who would sign in May take that precedent, because it's a negative precedent, they all criticize the signature of the 1959 between Sudan and Egypt as being between 2 parties alone, not the whole riparian countries. But they would do the same in May, which I see it short-sighted. I don't see a way out except they all sit and discuss the rightful share of each country for water from that river basin. If they go ahead, that would be, again, I would have to stress that word again, it would be short-sighted, and then that would be, say, the pathway or the entrance towards more conflicts and more issues to solve. We are complicating the issue. Sudan and Egypt might have the right or might not have the right, but still they are parties to that river basin, and if we claim that they are over-consuming, then we better sit down with them and talk and say, listen, we have to reach the rightful share. And you cannot do it by the CFA agreement in May. You have to do it, again, either through the MBI, which was wonderfully built, and why not follow that path? I don't see a reason. I don't see a war, of course. The history never had witnessed a big war on water. We are this is the Middle East and Africa. We might see wars on anything nowadays, but water is not the issue up till now, and I hope they wouldn't. It wouldn't lead to that.
No, well, it's certainly a good place to perhaps leave the conversation. Let's hope that all of the interested parties can find an applicable and peaceful solution to the problem. We'll be following this story, of course, on Al Jazeera and on Inside Story. To my gentlemen and friends in Amman, Nairobi and in Cairo, thank you very much for joining me on this edition of Inside Story, and thank you for watching. If you have any comments or suggestions, please do email them to us at insidestory@aljazeera.net. I'm Sahil Rahman. Thanks for your time and your company.